You know, people always talk about how love is the most powerful thing in the world. They say if you have it, you can get through anything. Yeah, I believed that too, until the day my world came crashing down around me. The woman I loved more than life itself, my Lily, walked away without so much as a proper goodbye. Left me in the middle of the storm, alone. We weren't even officially married, not in the legal sense, but to me, we were. We'd promised each other forever under the dim glow of candlelight in a small hidden chapel. Just me, her, and the vows we whispered. It was perfect, or so I thought. But that's when the problem started. And trust me, they came in waves. Now, I'm not telling you all this for pity. No, that's not my style. I'm here to set the record straight. I want you to hear the whole story, how it all started, how it all fell apart, so you can understand what I went through. Maybe then, you'll see how deep family pressure, money, and class can twist even the purest of love. So let's go back to the beginning, to the day I first met Lily. I was 25 at the time, just a regular guy doing my best to keep life on track. No family, no safety net. I'd been on my own for as long as I could remember. Being an orphan shapes you. You learn to fight your own battles and appreciate the small wins. When I wasn't grinding away at work, I volunteered. I liked being part of something that mattered. That's how I ended up at a community event. One of those charity things where people donate time, money, or whatever they can spare to help those in need. I wasn't expecting anything special to happen that day, just the usual routine of handing out supplies and chatting with folks. And then I saw her. She had this natural glow about her, like she didn't even have to try. Long, dark blonde hair pulled back into a simple ponytail, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans. No designer labels, no airs of superiority, just a warm, easygoing smile that instantly put people at ease. She was different, that much was obvious. We ended up working the same station, handing out food to families. Her name was Lily. We talked while we worked, and man, the way she listened. It was like I was the only person in the room. She wasn't just pretty. She had a heart. She cared. By the end of the day, I couldn't get her out of my head. And apparently she felt the same because she gave me her number before we parted ways. What followed were days of texts, phone calls, and long walks. Every time we met, I learned something new about her. She was curious, adventurous, and had a wicked sense of humor that caught me off guard. But there was something else too. A quiet sadness behind her eyes, like she was carrying a secret she wasn't ready to share. I didn't push her on it. I figured she'd tell me when she was ready. Until then, I was just happy to be around her. I had no clue who she really was. No idea what kind of world she came from. As the weeks went by, things between Lily and me grew serious fast. I had never felt this kind of connection with anyone before. Every moment with her was like breathing fresh air after a lifetime of suffocating. We spent as much time together as we could. Movies, walks, late-night talks about dreams and what the future might hold. It was like we had created our own little world. But there was something off. The closer we got, the more anxious Lily seemed. She'd get lost in her thoughts sometimes, eyes distant, like her mind was somewhere else. When I asked her if something was bothering her, she'd brush it off with a smile. "Nothing important," she'd say. But I knew better. There was a storm brewing inside her. One night, while we were watching the stars from a park bench, she finally opened up. Well, sort of. "My parents, they're complicated," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They have these expectations for me. Let's just say they're not exactly open-minded when it comes to my choices." I didn't know what to make of that at the time, but then she surprised me with an idea. "Let's do something for us, just for us. Let's get married. Well, not officially. I mean, a small secret ceremony, something that's just ours. No family, no outside world, just you and me." I was caught off guard, but the thought of making that kind of commitment to her? Hell, I was all in. We found this little chapel out in the countryside, barely big enough to hold 10 people. The place had this quiet charm, with worn wooden pews and stained glass windows that glowed soft gold in the evening light. the kind of place where promises seem to carry more weight. It wasn't anything fancy, but it didn't need to be. We exchanged vows, promising to always stand by each other. In that moment, I felt invincible, like nothing could ever tear us apart. But life has a funny way of kicking you in the teeth when you least expect it. After the ceremony, we rented a modest apartment in a quiet part of town. Money was tight, but I didn't care. I had dreams. Big ones. I wanted to build a career, maybe start my own business someday. I promised Lily that things would get better. One day, I told her, we'll have a nice house with a backyard, and you won't have to worry about anything. She believed in me, or at least that's what I thought. But deep down, I think she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And soon enough, it did. Things started falling apart on a random Tuesday. I remember it clearly because Lily and I had just finished dinner, and I was teasing her about how she always managed to burn the rice. We were laughing, the kind of deep, belly-aching laughter that makes you forget the world for a minute. Then came the knock on the door, hard, loud, persistent. We exchanged glances, both a little on edge. We weren't expecting anyone. I opened the door and there they were. Two people who looked like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. Her parents. Lily froze. Her face went pale, and for a moment I thought she was going to pass out. The woman, who I now realized was her mother, looked me up and down like I was something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her designer shoe. "So, this is him?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. The man, her father, didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk. Inside." Before I could even respond, they pushed their way in. I stood there, stunned, while Lily practically shrank into herself. The room filled with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I wanted to say something, anything, but I knew I was walking a razor's edge. "Let me guess," her father started, glaring at me like I was some sort of criminal. "You thought you could trap my daughter, live off her wealth, and ride off into the sunset. Is that it?" "What?" I blinked, trying to process his words. "I didn't even know." "Don't play dumb," her mother snapped. "Lily's been lying to you, hasn't she? Did you really think she was just some ordinary girl?" I looked over at Lily, searching for answers. She couldn't even meet my eyes. My heart sank. Her father continued, his voice like ice. "You're a nobody, a broke, parentless orphan. You think you're good enough for my daughter? You think you can give her the life she deserves? You're pathetic." Each word hit like a punch to the gut. I clenched my fists but forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper would only make things worse. After what felt like an eternity, they finally left, but not before issuing a warning. "If you care about her at all, you'll end this charade," her father said before slamming the door behind him. Silence filled the apartment. I turned to Lily, hoping for an explanation. "So, that's your family?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. "They're intense, controlling. I've spent my whole life trying to break free from them. That's why I didn't tell you. I didn't want them to ruin this." I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. "Lily, you should have told me. I don't care about your money or your family's name. I care about you. But now they think I'm some kind of gold digger." "I know," she said, wiping her tears, "but I swear I never wanted this. They won't stop." Neither of us knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. The days that followed were pure hell. I thought the worst was over after that night, but man, was I wrong. Lily's parents weren't just difficult, they were relentless. They had the kind of power and influence that could reach into every corner of my life, and they didn't waste time proving it. It started subtly. At work, my manager, who had always been fair with me, suddenly turned into a different person. Every little thing I did was wrong. He began nitpicking my projects, giving me impossible deadlines, and calling me out in front of the whole team. I overheard whispers from my coworkers about how the company had received a complaint about me. A complaint? From who? At first, I thought it was just bad luck. But then, it kept happening. My credit application for a small business loan was denied with no clear reason. My landlord mentioned that someone had called, inquiring about my rent payments. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Meanwhile, Lily was going through her own nightmare. Her parents froze her bank accounts and revoked access to every bit of financial independence she had. Suddenly, we were scrambling just to cover rent and groceries. She told me about it late one night, her voice shaking. "They're trying to push me back under their control," she said. "They want me to be dependent on them again. They think if they cut me off, I'll come crawling back." "And what do they want from you?" I asked, already knowing part of the answer. "They want me to leave you," she whispered, tears threatening to spill again. "They keep saying you're ruining my life, that I'll end up miserable and poor if I stay with you." It was maddening. Every time we tried to take a step forward, they yanked us 2 steps back, and as if that wasn't enough, they had another trick up their sleeve. Brett. Ah, Brett. The textbook definition of a spoiled rich kid. His father was an old friend of Lily's dad, and apparently they'd been dreaming of merging their fortunes through a marriage alliance. Brett was exactly the kind of guy her parents approved of. Wealthy, charming in a slimy way, and full of himself. The first time I heard about him, I almost laughed. Seriously? They think this guy is a better option than me? Lily didn't laugh, though. She hated Brett. "He's disgusting," she said. "He's always flirting with other girls and bragging about how much money his family has. But my parents act like he's some kind of saint." Despite her loathing for him, Brett wasn't about to give up. He made his presence known in the most obnoxious ways possible, sending flowers to Lily, showing up uninvited to her old social circles, and conveniently bumping into her at events. The guy was a snake, and he knew exactly how to turn the screws. Lily started to crack under the pressure. She tried to act strong around me, but I could see it in her eyes. She was scared, not just for herself, but for me too. "They'll destroy you, James," she said one night, gripping my hand tightly. "They'll ruin your reputation, your career, everything. I can't let that happen." I shook my head, trying to stay optimistic. "They can try, but they won't break us. We've come this far, Lily. We can figure this out." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. I underestimated just how far her parents were willing to go. The pressure kept building, like a vice tightening around our lives. Lily became more distant, her mind constantly elsewhere. She'd stare out the window for hours, barely responding when I spoke to her. I knew something was eating away at her, but every time I tried to talk about it, she'd just shake her head and say, "I'm fine." But she wasn't. One night, I decided to plan a romantic evening to take her mind off things. We cooked together, danced in the living room to our favorite song, and shared a bottle of cheap wine. For a few hours, it felt like the old days, just us, no problems, no threats. She smiled, really smiled, and for a moment, I thought everything would be okay. But when I woke up the next morning, the bed next to me was empty. Her side was cold. I rubbed my eyes and called out, "Lily?" No response. I got up and checked the apartment. Her clothes were gone. Her phone charger was missing. It was like she had vanished overnight. Panic set in as I grabbed my phone and tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. I called again, and again. Nothing. Then I saw it. A folded piece of paper sitting on the kitchen counter. My name was scribbled on the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. The words inside blurred for a moment as my heart pounded in my chest. "James, I'm so sorry. I love you, but this is the only way. I can't let them hurt you anymore. It's better if I leave. Please don't look for me. Just move on and be happy. You deserve that. I'll always love you." The paper slipped from my hands and fluttered to the floor. I couldn't believe it. She was gone. Just like that. After everything we'd been through, after all the promises we made to each other, she'd walked away. At first I was numb. Then the anger hit. I tore through the apartment, throwing open drawers, hoping, praying that there was some clue, some hint of where she might have gone. But there was nothing. Just silence. I didn't know where to turn. I tried calling mutual friends, but no one knew anything. Days passed in a haze. I barely slept, barely ate. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap, only to sink when it wasn't her. Then, the threats started. I got an anonymous call late one night. A deep voice on the other end said, "Stop asking questions or you'll regret it. You know, they love people like you in prison." Click. The next day, 2 men cornered me outside my building. One of them, a tall guy with slicked back hair, gave me a fake smile. "You're James, right? Don't go looking for Lily." Before I could react, the other guy drove his fist into my stomach. I doubled over, gasping for air as they laughed. "Oh, and by the way," the tall guy added, pulling out his phone. He showed me a text on the screen. "Lily has agreed to marry me." The smug bastard grinned. "She's moved on. You should too. By the way, she and I had a great night, so she doesn't even remember you." They walked off, their laughter echoing down the street. I sat there on the pavement, clutching my stomach. The words on that screen burned into my mind. Lily. Marrying Brett? No, that couldn't be true. It didn't make sense, but I was powerless, alone. What the hell was I supposed to do now? For 5 days, I was a wreck. I stayed locked in the apartment, drowning in a mix of anger, confusion, and heartache. I couldn't stop thinking about Lily. I kept reading and rereading that damn note. How could she say it was for my own good? How could she just vanish like that? And Brett? Was that text real? Had she really agreed to marry him, or was it just another one of their manipulative games? The turning point came on the 6th day. I woke up, stared at my reflection in the mirror, and barely recognized the man looking back at me. Dark circles under my eyes, unshaven, broken. "This isn't you," I whispered to myself. "You're not going down like this." I knew I couldn't trust anyone, but if I was going to get Lily back, or at least the truth, I had to start somewhere. And the only lead I had was Brett. That smug bastard had made this personal. If anyone knew what was really going on, it was him. So I made a decision. I was going to keep tabs on him, follow him, learn his patterns. If I could gather evidence of his lies and behavior, maybe, just maybe, I could use it against him. I wasn't exactly Sherlock Holmes, but I had persistence on my side. I started by finding out where Brett hung out. It wasn't hard. He loved being the center of attention. I tracked him to a fancy club downtown, one of those places with velvet ropes and bouncers in suits. Of course I couldn't afford to get in, so I waited outside in the shadows, blending in with the late-night crowd. Brett showed up around midnight, stumbling out of a limo with a group of equally entitled rich kids. They laughed and shoved each other, already half drunk. I followed from a distance, keeping my head down. They made their way to another exclusive spot, a penthouse suite in a luxury hotel. That's when I noticed something. Brett wasn't the perfect golden boy her parents thought he was. The guy was a mess. He drank like a fish, flirted with anything in a skirt, and treated people like trash. This was the guy they wanted Lily to marry? I once managed to sneak inside a nightclub. I snapped a few photos on my phone. Brett stumbling over himself, groping a woman at the bar, yelling at a waiter. I was also able to get some shots of him making out with 3 girls one at a time for 5 minutes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The problem was, I had nowhere to go. My job was on the line, and my bank account was practically empty. I ended up sleeping in my car most nights, surviving on cheap gas station sandwiches. Every penny I had went toward gas so I could keep following Brett. It was brutal, but I couldn't stop. This was the only way I could stay sane, by holding on to the hope that I could find a way to break through the lies. A few days later, my luck turned. Brett had a loud argument with one of his friends outside a club. "Man, you need to get your act together," the friend shouted. "You think your parents are going to keep covering for you forever? You're a liability." That was it. Proof that Brett was more of a problem than they were willing to admit. I captured the whole scene on video, including Brett's drunken response. "I don't care about anything. All I want from Lily is her inheritance." He laughed like a maniac before tripping over a trash can. I had what I needed. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to start planting seeds of doubt. Now I just had to figure out the right time and place to make my move. After a week of shadowing Brett, I finally stumbled upon something big, where Lily was staying. One afternoon, while waiting outside a gated mansion, I saw her. She walked out onto the front steps, her hair tied in a neat bun, dressed in a sleek but modest outfit. For a moment, my heart stopped. She looked so different, almost like a stranger. But it was her. My Lily. Before I could overthink it, I bolted out of my hiding spot and sprinted toward the entrance. "Lily!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. Her eyes widened in shock as she saw me. "James, what are you—" But before she could finish, 2 security guards materialized out of nowhere, grabbing my arms and pinning me to the ground. I struggled, yelling, "Lily, wait! Just talk to me for a minute!" "Stop it!" she called out. But the guards didn't loosen their grip. She approached us, her face unreadable. For a moment I thought she'd order them to let me go, but instead she lowered her gaze and said softly, "James, just leave, please. You don't belong here. I have a new life now." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Lily, what the hell are you talking about?" I gasped. "This isn't you. I know it's not." She didn't answer. She just shook her head, as if telling me that this was the end. The guards dragged me back to the gate, tossing me out like I was trash. I lay there on the ground for a few seconds, staring after her. She was gone, and I was left with a sinking feeling that this was worse than anything Brett or her parents had done so far. I spent the next few days in a fog. My mind replayed her words over and over again. "I have a new life now." What the hell was that supposed to mean? Was she really going to marry Brett? Could she have been so broken by all the pressure that she'd finally given in? Then it happened. I got a text. The message came from an unknown number, and it read, "I'm getting married in a week. I have a new life now. The wedding will take place at 181 Lakeside Drive, Saturday at 3 p.m. Don't come." I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. My chest tightened. At first I wanted to believe it was a cruel joke, but something didn't add up. If she truly didn't want me there, why would she give me the exact date and location of the wedding? I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. I kept calling again and again until I finally gave up. Over the next few days, I kept reading and rereading the message. It gnawed at me. Why tell me where and when if she wanted me to stay away? There was a hidden meaning in those words. I was sure of it. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a warning to stay away. It was a signal, a clue. Lily was telling me, in the only way she could, that I had one last chance. One last shot to stop this nightmare from happening. She couldn't say it outright because of her parents, Brett, and the guards, but the message was clear. I wasn't going to let her down. I knew I had to be smart about this. Showing up at a high-profile wedding uninvited was asking for trouble, especially with all the security her parents were sure to have. I needed a way to blend in, to slip past the guards unnoticed. That's when an idea hit me. I'd pose as a delivery guy. Weddings like this always had last-minute decorations or supplies coming in. No one would question a worker carrying a delivery box. I spent the next few days gathering what I needed. I found an old uniform at a thrift store, neutral enough to pass for a generic delivery service. I also got a large decorative box, the kind you'd expect to hold flowers or centerpieces. It was empty inside, but it looked the part. I even bought some fake ID tags and a clipboard to complete the disguise. Also, I put a cap on my head to cover my face. The wedding was set to take place at Lakeside Manor, a sprawling estate overlooking a crystal-clear lake. It was the kind of place you'd only see in glossy magazines, with perfectly manicured gardens and expensive architecture designed to impress. I parked my car at the end of the street and walked the rest of the distance, carrying the box as if I belonged there. As expected, there were guards stationed at the entrance. I kept my head down and spoke with confidence. "Got a delivery for the reception hall," I said, holding up the box. One of the guards glanced at the clipboard I carried without much interest. They were too busy dealing with other arriving guests to scrutinize me. "Go ahead," he said, waving me in. It worked. I was in. Inside, the scene was as extravagant as I had imagined. Giant floral arrangements lined the walkway, and crystal chandeliers sparkled in the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Guests milled about, dressed in designer suits and dresses that probably cost more than I made in a year. I stuck to the edges of the crowd, trying to stay out of sight. The last thing I needed was for someone to recognize me or start asking questions. Then I saw her. Lily. She was standing near the reception area, talking to a few older guests. She wore a stunning white gown, her hair styled in soft waves. From a distance, she looked calm, even happy, but I knew it was an act. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her eyes darted around the room as if she were searching for an escape. I wanted to rush over to her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But I couldn't be reckless. There were too many people, too much security. If I made a scene, they'd throw me out, or worse. Instead, I waited for the right moment. I kept moving, pretending to adjust decorations and check seating arrangements. I finally found my chance when Lily stepped away from the crowd, heading toward one of the side corridors. I followed her at a distance, careful not to draw attention. When she reached a quiet corner near a service hallway, I stepped forward. "Lily," I whispered urgently. She froze, then slowly turned around. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "James, what are you doing here? You can't be here. If my parents see you—" "I don't care," I interrupted. "We need to talk. You don't have to go through with this. You don't have to marry Brett. I know you don't want this." She looked torn, glancing around nervously. "You don't understand. It's not that simple." "Then make it simple," I said. "Tell me you don't love me. Tell me you're happy with Brett, and I'll walk away. But if there's any part of you that still wants us, any part at all, then come with me. Right now." Lily hesitated for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Meet me near the back entrance by the service exit. Give me 5 minutes." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding out of my chest. I made my way to the service exit, trying to stay calm even though my mind was racing. Everything was riding on this moment. If we got caught, I didn't know what her parents or Brett might do. But if we pulled it off, maybe we'd finally be free. The back area of the estate was quieter, with only a few staff members moving around. I found a corner near the service door and waited, my eyes darting around nervously. Minutes felt like hours. My pulse pounded in my ears as I replayed Lily's words in my head. What if she changed her mind? What if someone stopped her before she could get here? Then I saw her. She appeared at the far end of the hallway, her wedding gown shimmering under the overhead lights. She was holding the hem of her dress, moving quickly but cautiously. When our eyes met, she broke into a run, and for a second, all the fear melted away. This was real. She was choosing me. When she reached me, she was breathless. "We need to go, now," she said, her voice urgent. We slipped out through the service exit and into the side lot. She yanked off her veil and threw it behind a nearby bush. "Help me," she whispered, quickly pulling at the pins in her hair. I handed her a jacket I'd brought with me, and she draped it over her gown. "Where's your car?" she asked. "Down the street," I replied, motioning toward the back gate. "We'll have to make a run for it." Before we could move, a voice shouted from behind us, "Hey, stop right there!" Crap. Security had spotted us. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Lily's hand. We took off, sprinting across the lawn toward the back gate. The guards were gaining on us, their heavy footsteps echoing through the night. One of them nearly grabbed my arm, but I ducked and shoved him aside. He stumbled and crashed into another guard, both of them landing in a heap. "Come on!" I shouted to Lily, and we bolted through the gate. We reached my car, a beat-up old sedan I'd been living out of for the past few weeks. I threw open the passenger door, and Lily scrambled inside. I jumped behind the wheel, jammed the key into the ignition, and prayed it would start. For a terrifying moment, the engine sputtered and coughed. "Come on, you piece of crap," I muttered, turning the key again. Finally, the engine roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the tires screeched as we sped away from the estate. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might lose my nerve. For a while, Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine. When I finally glanced over at Lily, she was staring out the window, her face a mix of relief and fear. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded but didn't say anything for a moment. Then she turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. "James, I'm sorry. For everything. I was so scared. They told me they'd ruin you if I didn't go along with their plans. I thought I was protecting you." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You don't have to explain. I know. But you don't have to be scared anymore. We're in this together." She smiled faintly and wiped her eyes. "They wanted me to marry Brett. They said it was the only way to keep the family's reputation intact. But I hate him. I always have." "Yeah, I figured," I said, chuckling softly. "He's a real piece of work." Lily shuddered. "He kept pretending he was in control of everything, like he owned me. But I swear, James, I never let him touch me. I couldn't stand being around him." "I believe you," I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "And hey, I've got proof he's a scumbag. Check this out." I handed her my phone and showed her the photos and videos I'd taken of Brett's drunken escapades. She scrolled through them, her expression hardening. "I knew he was awful," she muttered. "But my parents need to see this. They need to know who they were trying to force me to marry." She quickly downloaded the files and typed out a message to her parents. "Mom, Dad, don't look for me. I'm done being your puppet. Here's a look at the perfect man you wanted for me." She attached the photos and videos and hit send. After a moment, she sighed and tossed her phone onto the dashboard. "That's that," she said. "Let's disappear for a while, just you and me." "Sounds like a plan," I replied, tightening my grip on the wheel. "Hold on tight. We've got a long road ahead." The first few days after we escaped were a blur. We had next to nothing, just the clothes on our backs and a few bucks I had stashed in my wallet. We needed to lay low and figure out our next move fast. The first place we found was a rundown motel on the edge of town. It was cheap and discreet, but it wasn't somewhere we could stay long. I spent that first night pacing the room while Lily tried to sleep. I knew her parents wouldn't give up easily. We needed a plan to stay ahead of them. The next morning, over a breakfast of stale vending machine snacks, we hashed it out. "We have to leave the country," Lily said. "If we stay, they'll find us." She wasn't wrong. I'd seen firsthand how far they were willing to go. The question was, how? Neither of us had enough money for plane tickets. "I have a friend who can help," Lily said after a long pause. "She owes me a favor. She might be able to get us across the border to Mexico." Over the next few nights, I worked under the table, hauling boxes for a guy who ran a shady storage business. It wasn't much, but it put a few more dollars in our pockets. Meanwhile, Lily took a job washing dishes in a diner that didn't ask too many questions. We barely slept, constantly looking over our shoulders. Every knock on the door made my heart race. But after 3 long nights, we had enough to make a move. Lily's friend came through and arranged a way for us to cross the border discreetly. It was risky, but we didn't have any other choice. We made it into Mexico and found a tiny town where no one knew us. It was the kind of place where people didn't ask for your backstory. We rented a room in a rundown hostel and spent the next few weeks trying to earn enough money to survive. I found more labor work, unloading trucks at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Lily got another dishwashing job, this time at a small cafe. It was hard. There were days when we didn't have enough money for a full meal. Nights when we slept on hard, lumpy mattresses in rooms that smelled of mildew. But we had each other, and that was the one thing that kept us going. After a month, we knew we couldn't stay in one place for too long. We scraped together what we had and moved south, deeper into South America. For the next few months, we hopped from town to town, picking up whatever work we could find. I learned to fix things, engines, appliances, anything I could get my hands on. Lily took on jobs as a waitress and even helped with local markets. It wasn't glamorous, but we were surviving. The fear of being found never fully left us, but it started to fade into the background. We were learning how to live on the run. Eventually, we made our way to Europe. I still don't know how we managed to afford the plane tickets. Probably a combination of luck and Lily's knack for negotiating. We landed in a small town in southern Spain and kept moving from country to country over the next year. At some point, Lily had an idea. "We should start documenting our journey," she said one night while we were sitting under the stars. "Maybe we can turn it into something more." It sounded crazy at first. Who would want to hear about two fugitives wandering the globe? But Lily was determined. We made up nicknames and started new social media accounts. We started with a few social media posts, photos of the places we'd been and the people we'd met. The main highlight was how we survived with a few dollars a day. We showed people how to find temporary part-time work and how to hitchhike. To our surprise, people loved it. They were fascinated by our story, though of course we left out certain details. Over time, the blog gained traction. We started getting small sponsorships from travel brands. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to buy decent meals, rent better places to stay, and replace our worn-out gear. Slowly but surely, things improved. We learned how to create content, how to edit videos, and how to build a following. We weren't rich, but for the first time in a long while, we were stable. 2 years later, we were finally ready to return to the United States. No, we weren't rich, far from it, but we had learned how to provide for ourselves. We had a stable income from the blog, enough to live comfortably. We weren't the same scared couple that had fled in the middle of the night. Now, we stood on our own 2 feet. There was no shame in going back. As we prepared for the return, Lily shared something surprising with me. One of her old friends had reached out with news. My parents weren't as powerful as they used to be. Their wealth and influence had taken a hit over the past 2 years, though no one knew all the details. Life has a way of humbling even the most untouchable people, I guess. But that left a question hanging in the air, one neither of us could answer yet. Could Lily ever forgive them for what they'd done? And if we faced them again, would they finally accept her choices? I wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. The story with her parents wasn't finished. Maybe someday we'd find out how it ends, but that's a tale for another time.